And now I'd like to introduce to the stage Karen Levy from Cornell University.
So, there's a lot of, as Andy highlighted, there's a bunch of well-founded concern lately about the economic impact of potentially massive job loss based on AI. A lot of people are worried about the possibility that millions of workers will find themselves without the means to provide for themselves in the way that they traditionally have, and there's a lot of economists really concerned about what we're going to do about that. There's a lot of concern as well about what sectors are most likely to be disrupted first. And a lot of people agree that a prime target for a really significant economic disruption is long-haul trucking. There are a bunch of reasons for this, some of which have to do with kind of the technical capacities around, like the huge innovation in autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicles actually lend themselves really well to the style of driving that trucking entails. And then there's other factors too having to do with the nature of trucking work. Truckers, because of the way the industry is organized now, truck drivers get really tired, they're really overworked, and so they cause a lot of accidents on the road, which are expensive and deadly. And so there's a lot of interest kind of from the labor perspective too in finding ways to take these guys off the road, put robots in the cab. So this is like a really big concern. And a lot of the rhetoric is about this displacement, right? Like there are a lot of people really concerned about the fact that there are 2 million truck drivers in the United States. Many of you may have seen this graphic from NPR a couple years ago using Bureau of Labor Statistics data to show the most common job in every state. So you can see that those aqua states, the most common job in 2014 was truck driver. And so people are worried about like, what does this mean, right? If there's massive job loss in this industry. Now I think, I've been studying technology and regulation in truck driving for about 6 years now. And I think this captures certainly a large part of the threat of automation to this sector. But what I want to talk about today is actually a different threat, which I think gets a lot less play. And I don't think that there's going to be a discrete phase transition. It doesn't go like human, 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 robot, right? Like not all of a sudden will there be this huge, massive displacement of workers. Instead, being a truck driver actually involves a bunch of different types of work that aren't driving. And those are harder to automate, at least harder to automate in the short term. These are things like loading and unloading freight, securing stuff to a truck, doing repairs, interfacing with customers, these types of things. Some of those will be able to automate in time, but we can't do it right away. And therefore, truckers are still going to be necessary. It's just that the nature of their work is going to change. And what we're going to ask them to do is coordinate and integrate their work with machines. Now, a lot of times people talk about like a handoff, like a passing of a baton between a human and a machine. But what we actually see happening in truck driving right now is not really a discrete parceling out of tasks. What we see instead is actually the integration of the human into the machine in a way that's very gradual and very physical and actually quite intimate. I'm going to give you some examples of what I'm talking about. So this is a cartoon that was in a trucking publication a few months ago, showing like a slightly stylized but actually based on all real technologies, this image of the robo-trucker. And I'll tell you a little bit about some of these systems. So Mercedes recently announced that it's working on a vest for truck drivers that will monitor their heart rate and their vital signs, and if the driver is in danger of a heart attack, it will stop the truck immediately. This is a system called Seeing Machines, which uses a driver-facing camera to monitor a driver's eyelids. It detects if the driver's eyelids are closing or if the driver's starting to look away from the road, and if it does that, it alerts his boss. That's logged like in his record, and it's used as training data. And it also, this is the best part, it causes the driver's seat to vibrate. It kind of like gooses him back into attention. These drivers are wearing what's called the smart cap, which essentially is like constantly running an EEG to look at a driver's brainwaves in order to understand fatigue. So if you get tired, it'll sound an alarm. It can be configured to text your manager or even your family members. There are other systems too. Some companies use predictive analytics to predict whether or not a driver is at risk of being in a crash. And it'll use not only driving data, but also information about the driver's life, like if their pay rate has changed recently, if they've started their day later in the morning than they usually do, that sort of thing. And so the key point I want to make here in a few more remaining seconds is the distance between these two types of threat, right? So we hear a lot about this threat of displacement, right? This threat that there are no longer going to be truckers on the road, and that's going to cause like tremendous tears to the social fabric. What we hear less of is this concomitant threat, which is that the nature of the work that remains is going to be really different, right? There's this displacement narrative, but then I think there's this kind of under-theorized narrative about intrusion, right? And about the way that AI is actually felt in this industry as this like really forced hybridization of human and machine. And that's what I wanted to highlight today. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen.